Can you hear me now? Okay. Sound all right? Good. That's good. Biodiversity. Hmm. Good. So, studying the teaching on Buddha nature, it's called the Uttara Tantra of Maitreya. So usually we start off just meditating just for a few minutes on something from the previous class. So we could do that. It's been doing. So we're going to do these various like similes for our Buddha nature. I think we could just start for a couple minutes meditating on this one simile text gives, which is that our Buddha nature is like honey, and that what in this simile, what blocks us from getting to it is the bees, agitated bees. So we're going to contemplate this one together for a couple minutes. The idea here is that we ourselves and everyone else, right, at our core, has this sweet, right? It's actually part of the metaphor here is that honey is sweet, and it's equally sweet in everyone. So the essential nature of our own mind, the essential nature of others' mind, hidden within. In this sense, we're all the same. And as we kind of studied last time, the bees can represent anger, agitation, defensiveness. And when we ourselves are angry, agitated, or defensive, or when others are, and if we focus on that aspect of the mind, then it can be difficult to remember that Buddha nature is already there. So even as we or others are angry, within us is this capacity for infinite love, infinite compassion, limitless, infinite wisdom. So think for a moment. First, just think. Let's each just think for a moment of a time when we ourselves were angry, offensive, or agitated, annoyed, just like the bees. And at that time, all of our attention was most likely taken up with the anger itself and what we were angry about, our thoughts, ruminations about that. So part of what Maitreya is saying here is that right in that moment, even in that moment, our honey-like Buddha nature was still present, right there. And our tendency is to focus on, we tend to in daily life focus on the bees and not the honey, right? On our anger, our agitation, our upset, and not on our Buddha nature, not on our capacity, on our, not on the part of us that we already have in common with the Buddha. But it's there, totally undisturbed. No matter how much anger or defensiveness or whatever there is, it doesn't harm our Buddha nature. It doesn't erase our Buddha nature. Buddha nature was there and always will be there until we become fully enlightened. It's there right now. Like honey's hidden, behind agitated bees and inside of a hive. Just like that, we have our current mental afflictions, our imperfections, our confusions. Right this moment, hidden from us, it's hidden somewhat, or hidden completely maybe, but within us, it's there. This indestructible potential, indestructible capacity for enlightenment. Just do the same contemplation. And bring to mind just one other person, somebody, it could be somebody in your personal life or the public sphere. In this case, who you think of as particularly, say, angry and hateful or agitating. So that's like the bees. It's a simile for that. The bees are a simile for that. And we just contemplate for a couple minutes how the deepest nature of that person's mind and the deepest nature of my mind and the deepest nature of the Buddha's mind are of one taste. And that's the Buddha nature. Notice how, you may notice, I guess, that we tend to grasp or focus on the more superficial or external aspect. Part of this teaching is to shift our focus, experiment with shifting our focus, is recognizing that at this deepest level, we ourselves and this other person, right, are the same in having Buddha nature, a potential, right, for enlightenment, a potential for, with all the qualities of it, great love, great compassion, wisdom, skill. And just notice for a moment, what's it like? If you focus your attention, on that aspect, first of yourself and then of this other person you brought to mind. Last part of this contemplation, is that part of the purpose of this. One is, so that regarding ourselves, we have helps to develop a sense of sort of hope, encouragement, courage, enthusiasm. Towards others, it helps decrease being judgmental, but it also helps us to focus on what's important, actually. So in the simile, swatting at the bees is not helpful. The text said, right, if an expert were to point out to the person, oh, there's a lot of honey in that hive, then they would, wear the beekeeper's outfit, use smoke and so on, like to harvest the honey. And so the simile is that, that's a simile for the Dharma practices. That we can access that honey first in ourselves, and then we can help others. And, we can then Similarly, we use the honey to sort of to nourish ourselves and others. That's part of the implication here. So we use our potential for enlightenment to benefit ourselves and others, all limitless of it. Mm. And so with that kind of a motivation, right, with this wish to say uncover our Buddha nature, develop our capacity for enlightenment. I'll just once do the verse slowly. I'll do once the verse of refuge and bodhicitta. They go for refuge till enlightened, the Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha. Through the merits of giving, the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Good see. And so all the different similes, there are nine of them. They're all for actual contemplation. Part of what I've emphasized in this last couple of classes that all these different similes are for contemplation, for the purpose of sort of contemplating, both if you're sitting on a cushion, but also in real life. Like so when you come across, and different we went through last time, the different each simile has this you know, something hidden within and then something that's obscuring it. And so they're all similes for Buddha nature, right? And so it's like what one was the honey inside the with agitated bees obscuring them, or there's other one where it's like a treasure hidden in filth, right? But the treasure's still there, even though it's hidden in filth, and so on. And part of the idea is that as when you're feeling out of which sort, when you yourself are having the filth, right, which we have, then you stop and you contemplate, okay, that's happening. There are mental afflictions, in other words, there's anger, there's pride, there's jealousy, there's craving, and so on. But underneath them is this Buddha nature, right? So you contemplate it. And same with others when you're feeling with somebody or something, then you contemplate that they also have Buddha nature. Right? And so there are different ways, and then in the text, you can contemplate them in general, and then the text also gives these specific sort of themes of contemplation that you can use. And you don't have to use any of them at any given meditation session, but they're all options. So like Maitreya is giving these different options to contemplate um, that can help at different points in your practice, in our practice. So you check which one seems relevant in that day, so to speak. And that was why last time we talked about how last time we really focused on the obscuring things, right? So there's like the mud, and they each symbolize a different. They can symbolize the mental afflictions in general, or each one can be taken to symbolize a specific kind of mental affliction. One example was like a wilted flower that's covering over a wilted lotus that's covering over a golden Buddha statue. Right? And so the idea is that the wilted lotus was a symbol. It was like it was like kind of a rotting lotus, so you couldn't see the Buddha statue that was inside of it. And now the bees tend to, if you're going to do it this way, they tend to symbolize defensiveness or anger, right? Because bees sting, and part of the metaphor there is that even as the bee stings, it dies, right? And just like that, when we get angry and act out on our anger, we harm ourselves as well as the other. That's the metaphor there. The wilted lotus is a symbol for how when we desire something, we think it looks beautiful, but whatever we desire is impermanent. Right? So you just when you grasp at something as if it's permanent and will make you permanently happy, you wind up frustrated because things aren't permanent; they change. So anyway, last time we covered the obscuring, these nine different obscuring things and ways of using them to think about different things that obscure our Buddha nature. And then today, where we're up to in the text, are the nine different things inside and what they can be taken to symbolize if you want to. And from one perspective, you can say, well, they're all Buddha nature. They all symbolize Buddha nature. But then here, the author, Stewart, gives themes to contemplate about them. And he makes the point, There's the quote from Gyaltsab J, his commentary. Oh, there's where he says, these nine different things that are hidden, you know, uh, are not different. He said the way he says they are not differentiated by the way they're entity by having different defining characteristics. What he's getting at here is uh, what's hidden is in all these similes is Buddha nature. But then he says, for your contemplation, you can contemplate different things about that, different things that relate to that, different ways of contemplating about that. So he gives these different options. So I'll pick up in the text here. So he says, so here he calls Buddha nature the basic element. There are different, we've said this before, but there are many different terms he uses for Buddha nature, right? The lineage, the basic element, um, the Tathagata Garbha is the most common one, which is like the Garbha is like the seed or the essence of a Tathagata, meaning a Buddha, one thus gone, one gone thus. So, but here he uses this term basic element. So he says, because the basic element can be subsumed into three natures, it corresponds to the Buddha and so on. So he's saying these nine images of what's inside can be broken down into three categories, three natures. Meaning like you can think of them in three different categories. Those three are one is the Dharmakaya. So and what's the Dharmakaya? It's the truth body of a Buddha. So he's saying one way of taking Buddha nature is I think of it in terms of the result, which is the resultant state that you'll achieve through that, right? So you already have Buddha nature, but we don't yet have the resultant state. So we're a Buddha. But he's saying one way of thinking about the Buddha nature is in terms of what it leads to, which is this Dharmakaya, which is the mind of a Buddha. Uh, Another way of thinking about it, of Buddha nature, the second of these three ways, is they call it suchness here, meaning emptiness or the nature of things. The suchness of things, meaning how they actually exist, not how they appear, but their actual nature, their deepest nature, you could say. So that's another way of thinking about Buddha nature is it's the deepest nature of your own mind. So you can think about it in terms of its suchness, its actual nature. And then the third category or way of thinking about Buddha nature here is what they'll call it lineage here, which in Tibetan is like Rik. And that's like, it's actually interesting. We often think of, I think it's actually, Buddhism does this a lot of times in different ways, but here, actually, it's like, we think about ourselves sometimes in terms of our lineage. We don't usually use that term in English, I don't think, but right, it's like what's your heritage or what's your family or what's your background. And that impacts us in certain ways, right? Actually in whatever culture you're in and so on, what's your culture, what's your nationality, these different like identities we have. So I think I actually think that they use this term lineage or as a play on that to say, actually those are true, if you have a certain heritage, that's your heritage. But what this is saying is your deepest heritage, right? What's your deepest heritage is your own capacity for enlightenment, your deepest lineage. Like because sometimes like somebody's like going to be I guess also if actually this started. I mean, actually it's um, was of course started in India where lineage was connected to caste. Um, but I think it's funny. One time, I remember Jan Willis was my first teacher, Buddhism professor. Jan Willis said that, but she was in India when she was young. She met a kind of I think, an Indian person who said, and she kind of had some, I can't remember the details, but she had some interaction where she said, like he was kind of like, she was pointing out that from his perspective, America had quite a caste system. And she was like, oh no, we don't have a caste system. And then she was like, oh wait, he has a point. Um, my point being, this word lineage also has a connection to the connotation of that, right? What's your class? What's your whatever? All these different connotations. What's your background? What's your family? But here, what it's saying is all of our family is the same. And actually, this isn't just for humans, right? That you and a mosquito have the same lineage in this sense. So it's a radical reform. It's a radical way of reforming our idea of what's our lineage, if that makes sense. So you could, I mean, and it's not to deny if you say, well, however you think of your lineage, it's not denying that, but it's saying that's a superficial level. Your deepest lineage is your Buddha nature, is your capacity for enlightenment. So anyway, I think that's a nice. I like that use of the term. So some of these are relate, and lineage is a term they use. One of the terms for Buddha nature. So it's saying another way of thinking about these different what's hidden inside is what's your Buddha nature, what's your deepest lineage, your deepest, yeah. So it says, and that's what it says here. Its nature is the Dharmakaya, Suttness, and the lineage. So just listing those three ways that you can categorize it. And it says, these should be known by way of, the text often does this. It says, then these should be known by way of 3, 1, and 5 similes, respectively. So it's just saying, you know, one of them has three of the images, right? One of them only has one, and then one has five. We'll go into them, so we'll just explain them in order. Um, so the first three, so it said these should be known by way of first there's three, right? So the first three images of simile from the similes are for Dharmakaya. That's what it's saying. Which is again Dharmakaya. Like Dharma is actually you could say Dharma has many meanings, by the way, in Sanskrit. But here you could call it truth. And so Dharma meaning the actual nature of things, and then Kaya is body. Like so the you could say so it really means the Buddha's mind that sees reality as it is. So what the text says is the first is the utterly undefiled Dharmadhatu. So that's the image from the similes is that was the one I just mentioned a few minutes ago. It's a statue of a Buddha, like a golden, beautiful statue of a Buddha that's hidden inside of a kind of decayed lotus. So somebody had put it, let's say, inside a lotus, but then the lotus decayed and kind of wilted around it and became kind of old lotuses become kind of stinky. Old flowers do that, right? Flowers are so pretty, and then they become kind of you leave them out too long. So it's like that. So the Buddha statue is there hidden inside that, right? The decayed lotus can symbolize your mental afflictions in general, or particularly mental affliction of desire. So there are other points about that. I won't repeat those from their previous class, but here we're getting at what's the Buddha form. And so what they, so there's this golden Buddha, and what they say is that that's like encrusted with jewels. It's a very beautiful statue, is what that's the image in the simile. And they say here, the author says that they chose the Buddha statue is chosen as a simile for the Dharmakaya because it's incomparable to anything in the world, and it's a representation of enlightenment, which and actually it's comparable in this sense. In one sense, you could say it this way, because actual wealth, of course, um, actually, people we work very hard for wealth, don't we? But world sometimes, but it's actually not reliable at all, is it? Um, I mean, actually, it's true, isn't it? You think about it. Like, so for example, somebody can make a lot of money in currency, and then if that government fails, that currency is completely useless. It happens all the time throughout history. Um, or actually, suddenly get sick and are dying, your currency is not particularly helpful either. Uh, and so on, right? So when they say incomparable to anything in the world, what they're getting at is that it's a symbol of a spiritual quality, right? That actually has value no matter what. Um, and just pause and again because what we do is we contemplate these things, right? This is how you meditate. I mean, there are correspondences here, but you actually stop and you think about that. So I'm just pausing again, like, and do you get that point in a way, right? Like, I remember for me it brings up my memories of Reaper Rinpoche's pictured there, but it was one of my teachers who passed away, and I often think of him in this context. I sat with him sometimes. I sat with him in actually it was doing a retreat in a mansion at the time that was owned by Richard Gere. Uh, so I went and visited him there, and he seemed totally blissful. And then I sat with him when he had cancer and was dying, and he seemed equally blissful. I remember I was sitting with him in like the ecology office, and I was like, oh, he looks more peaceful than I've ever yet felt. And I was like, that's true wealth. Like that's incomparable to anything in the world. Right? Um, like, and he had said that he had been tortured by the Chinese Communist Party, and he said, He said, although my body suffered, my mind only knew pure joy while I was in prison. So it's like that's actually when it says incomparable to anything in the world, that's what that's getting at. An inner quality that's beyond anything in the world, right? It's more valuable than anything in the world because it's free, actually, right? It's a kind of freedom. Um, so what we're looking for is that kind of. So this is a symbol of that. Right? This golden is a mind that has that kind of quality. Right? The mind of a Buddha. So so what the text said, right, is it's the utterly undefiled Dharma Dhatu. So here, what this Buddha form symbolizes is the mind of a Buddha, particularly the wisdom truth body, directly realizing the ultimate truth. That's the actual definition of what it's symbolizing. So it's symbolizing the mind of a fully enlightened Buddha while they're in well, actually they never leave this state. So in other words, a Buddha, by definition, is somebody who even when they're sitting in meditation or when they're interacting with others, when they're walking, talking, they remain in a state of uh, meditation, actually, where they're seeing the ultimate nature of things. They never leave that anymore. Or anybody else, even like bodhisattvas, meditate on the ultimate nature of things and they come out of that state in order to interact. Buddhas never again come out of that state. So Buddhas can interact spontaneously and blissfully with others while remaining in a kind of meditative equipoise. So this is saying it's that kind of mind that never will again leave that state of seeing the ultimate nature, seeing how things actually exist directly and non-conceptually. And what this is getting at is that first of all, that's our aim, right? That's what we're trying. And the Buddha nature is the ultimate nature of our mind. That's what the Buddha nature, we've already covered that before. So the Buddha nature is the ultimate nature of here, but you don't realize it. They're getting, right? That's the idea here. And in the Dharmakaya state, you have realized that, and you don't leave that state of realization. So it's actually interesting. What the Dharmakaya realizes, you already have. You just don't see it right, yet. Um, and so what we're aiming for is a mind that sees that, that doesn't forget the nature, its own nature, because we don't understand the nature of the mind. Yeah. Actually, it's an interesting question. The way they teach the way it's explained is this: is that the first of all, the word permanent is always tricky. I always say this when we use it in English. I mean, because in Buddhism, impermanent means that which changes moment to moment, and something permanent doesn't mean eternal. It just means something that doesn't change moment to moment. That's one point I'll make in Buddhism, right? So, in other words, anything impermanent, like so, like for example, and it's actually interesting, isn't it? Like so, like for example, a solid building is impermanent. It looks permanent to us. You know, if you look at a brand new building and it seems it can look, oh wow, that looks permanent. It's not changing. It doesn't seem like it's changing, but of course it's changing moment to moment. That's one point I'm making, right? So like anything impermanent changes moment to moment. Where yeah, anything impermanent, and whereas permanent phenomena don't change moment to moment. An example of that would be empty space. Uh, like so, empty space that has nothing in it they would say only exists conceptually, so it's not changing moment to moment. It's a concept. You could say I could, you know, I could posit that there's empty space somewhere, and that's a concept, for example, you know, so it's not changing moment to moment. It's a concept. Um, so going back to your question, uh, the Dharmakaya has one aspect is the uh, that which is realized, the emptiness of the mind. That is impermanent. That's permanent, rather, in the sense that's not changing instant to instant because it's an emptiness. It's a non-affirming negation. But the mind of a Buddha is impermanent in the sense that it's changing instant by instant to instant because it's an awareness. But it's but its continuum of wisdom is eternal. So, but what actually, well, here's the way I actually would say it. I remember I once had like a long conversation with Ken Rinpoche about this because I was trying to understand it myself, and he because I say this like they say Buddhas are omniscient, so they know everything. Right? And so I said, I said to Kent Rinpoche, well, if a Buddha knows everything, then first of all, how is there even free will? Things are changing. Like, how can Buddha know what I'm going to do if I don't have decided yet? And he said, he made an interesting point. He said, oh, you don't understand what everything means. Everything means all that exists. And he said, but there are things that don't exist that will exist in another moment. And he said, and once they exist, the Buddha knows those. Uh, he said, but Buddhas don't know non-existent phenomena. So in that sense, it was an interesting point, right? So what a Buddha is fresh in each instant, knowing all that exists in that instant and all that existed before that instant. But the Buddha knows future things. Actually, it's an interesting thing. Sometimes there are Buddhist texts where it says at a certain point the Buddha predicted somebody else's future enlightenment. So the Buddha knew that person will, and the Buddha will say in certain scriptures, you can read it, where the Buddha will meet a bodhisattva and say, they'll sometimes say, now all the causes are complete. And in such and such number of thousands or millions of years, you will become a Buddha in this universe with this name, with this. Because at that point, what's the word? It became unstoppable that that person is going to become a Buddha. But they sometimes will say at other points, the Buddha couldn't make a prediction because it's not all the causes weren't the causes weren't there, so it wasn't an existent phenomenon yet. So answering your question, the Buddha knows in that moment all that is. But the Buddha doesn't, in another moment, there are other things that are, and then the Buddha knows those. So the Buddha's mind has to be impermanent in the sense that it's knowing each moment as it is. Does that answer your question? Yeah, that's how I feel too. Even the idea of omniscience is kind of inconceivable, but it's something to contemplate. But okay, so this first simile is this the Buddha statue, and what it symbolizes is that kind of mind, the wisdom truth body that directly realizes the ultimate truth. The second of the obscured phenomena is listed here, which is it says uh, that which is the concordant cause of it, of the Dharmakaya, the teaching by way of the profound, definitive meaning. That's really the way to describe it. So what this one is the honey we just talked about. This is saying one way of thinking about the honey, as what if you want to think about Carl these if you want to think about it this way, you don't have to, but if he's giving options here. So he's saying one way of thinking about the honey is it's the teachings of the Buddha on the ultimate nature of things. And what he's saying here is why is that related? That's not the actual Dharmakaya. It's not the actual mind of a Buddha. It's the teaching, right? And then he's saying, but that teaching is what causes the Dharmakaya, right? In other words, you already have a Buddha nature. You already have Buddha nature. But but we don't awaken to it unless somebody points it out. And that's often given here in this, and earlier in the similes, it'll say like, somebody has to point out, hey, there's a Buddha statue inside that lotus, or hey, there's honey in that hive over there, or hey, there's treasure under that mud. So somebody needs to point out the Buddha nature that's there, or we don't know it's there, right? So here, the idea is that the scriptures that teach the ultimate nature of things. So they're called, and in Buddhism, there's this, many Buddhist teachers throughout history have pointed this out. They were like, they call them sometimes interpretable teachings or teachings to be interpreted, and then definitive teachings. Definitive teachings are those teachings that teach the ultimate nature of things. Interpretable teachings are teachings that teach things that may be true but aren't the ultimate nature, aren't the final nature. So here we're talking about the teachings on the ultimate nature, the final nature of things, which is their emptiness, or their suchness, as we can use the term. So what it's saying is the teachings that teach the ultimate final nature of things, when you listen to them and meditate on them, that's how you achieve the Dharma. So they're the cause. That's why it says, as I just read it, right? That which is the concordant cause. So those teachings are the concordant cause for you to realize the Dharma.
I don't understand the word concord. Is there another way to?
Corresponding, you could say, like corresponding cause, you could say. So like, because like there are many different like so the concordant cause of a tomato plant is tomato seed, whereas the
Seed.
concordant cause of an apple tree is an apple seed. So it's like the corresponding cause.
Okay,
So it's the cause that leads directly to that result.
okay,
And it's not a cooperative condition. It's like the main cause that leads to that specific result. It's not a cause that leads to a different result or a corresponding or a what's the word? Or one of the supporting conditions. It's the main cause
okay.
that
So,
corresponds.
so it's the main cause, and so the seed of the apple tree is the main cause of the apple tree.
Yep.
And there's no, it's kind of a direct
Correlation. Yeah,
correlation. Okay,
so you can say correlated. It correlates. That's probably a better way to put it. Correlating. Um, and one more point I'll make is part of the reason why they use honey is that honey is I mentioned it earlier when we were doing the meditation. One taste, like in other words, sometimes they'll use sugar or honey and these similes where they'll say there is that, and the idea here is that actually there are 2 points I think that are worth contemplating if you're going to contemplate this one. One is that I'm going to say it because in a way there are different kinds of honey that maybe they do taste slightly different, but in the simile that's not what's being emphasized. What they're actually saying is that all phenomena's ultimate nature is of one taste. Is one there is that the nature, the nature of your own mind, the ultimate nature of your own mind, and the ultimate nature of a chair, and the ultimate nature of uh, dirt, and the ultimate nature of gold, are all equally emptiness. So it's all of one taste is one implication. So there's not that they're all the same in the sense that not that all things uh, not that your mind and a chair are the same, but that their ultimate nature are the same, meaning they're empty of intrinsic existence. Another point, though, that's worth getting at, which I just think is worth contemplating a little bit too. Um, you know, oh gosh, a couple of years ago, I think it was, Bob Thurman came out with a book. Professor Thurman came out with a book called, I think the title was "Wisdom is Bliss." I think that was the title, if I remember right. And what he was getting at is that the wisdom understanding the nature of reality is blissful. And so that's I think part of why they use honey also, is that when you realize the nature of things, it's sweet, it's blissful, it's delicious. It's use different ways to put it. Um, you know, it's liberating, and, and so on. You can say it different ways. It's liberating and it's blissful. It's why actually what they say is part of the reason why they say when there are mentioned this before, there are 10 ground or I'm sorry, yeah, 10 grounds, 10 levels that bodhisattvas go through after they realize emptiness directly. And the very first of them, right, when they first realize emptiness directly, it's called the joyful ground. And they say that's true because it's so joyful to finally realize the ultimate nature of your own mind is such a joyful experience that's called the joyful level. It's like because it's said to be a great joy to realize that. So the second one, the correlation there, you get it. It's like, I hope that's clear that it's like, so it's the teachings that explain how to real the nature of or the nature of phenomena. And that's the correlation there. And then I'll do the last one, and I'll pause in case there are questions. The last of these three, right? Because there are three for the Dharmakaya. And the text it says, and the various interpretable sutras. So I said, right, there's and actually I did read this part too. The first one, the second one said the teaching of the sutras of definitive meaning is subtle and deep. Oh, that's what I just said. Like the singular taste of honey, right? So like one taste. So I said. Then here it says the teachings of the sutras of interpretable meaning in multiple ways is similar to the kernels hidden in their husks. So that's the metaphor here is that the simile was there's like a grain, but it's inside a husk, right? And you can't eat a grain until you dehusk it, right? Like so if you've seen like barley inside it's right or wheat or something, you can't make bread with that. And so we said last time the husk oftentimes symbolizes ignorance that obscures, right? So you have to kind of remove the ignorance to reveal that which nourishes. And so these so the grain is what's nourishing, but you have to remove the husk and then you can receive the nourishment of the grain. So this one symbolizes not the one taste, not the ultimate nature, but the Buddha's teachings on all the different kinds of phenomena. And so the simile there, or the point that Maitreya is making, is that there are a lot of, there's wheat and there's barley and there's, you know, all this other rice and I don't know what all kinds of there are all these different kinds of grains, right? And so similarly, there are many different, what's the word, conventionalities or conventional phenomena that exist that can be understood. And so it's a symbol, that symbol of the different grains is a symbol for those kinds of teachings, the teachings of on the interpretable. And so examples of the teaching on the interpretable would be, they're both, and I guess I'll say there are some that are about the conventional nature of phenomena, like how karma works, and that, and that actions done with hatred lead to suffering, and actions done out of love lead to happiness. And then there are also interpretable teachings that teach like, what's the word? Philosophical point. The Buddha taught certain philosophical things that are steps that help beings get closer to being able to realize the ultimate nature of things, but aren't yet teaching the ultimate nature, because some people aren't ready to study that. So he taught like step by step how to approach that. So those would be interpretable. They're getting somebody closer to being ready to realize the ultimate, but they're not yet teaching on the ultimate. So that would be examples of the husks, right? And all those, and the point of the part of the idea here, if you're contemplating it, is that all those different kinds of grains provide nourishment for different kinds of people or for us ourselves at different moments, right? And so you would think, okay, all those different kinds of teachings can be useful in different contexts for me, myself, is part of the simile. So those are the three about related to the Dharmakaya. Any questions about those before I go on to the one that's related to suchness? Okay. Then the one that's related to suchness is the simile in this one is kind of like gold that the in the story, right, that we from earlier in the text, right, it was as if like there was a traveler who had like an extremely valuable piece of gold, and it fell out of their bag into like filth, they call it. It's like you would think it fell into a I haven't said like last time, these are like you could almost take them as like you could imagine them being like parts of stories in a movie or something, right? Like so there was a traveler and they were, almost like a fantasy movie or something. But anyway, there was a traveler with an incredibly valuable piece of gold and it fell out of their bag into like what do you call it? Where there's like poop,
Yeah.
like a cesspool or yeah, whatever like that. And it's into a septic system. Yeah. And he or she didn't know it fell there. And so it was just sitting there, right? And like maybe there are people now near passing by who are in poverty, but they don't know there's gold there, so they just keep going. And then eventually somebody points out, hey, inside there's really valuable gold. And if you clean it off, you'll be wealthy. That's the simile here, right? So the simile is that gold is the Buddha nature, and the filth is the different mental afflictions that we have. So here he's saying, if you want to contemplate the gold right now, then how would you contemplate? And he says that gold, he said, you can take that as the actual final nature. So not the Dharmakaya that realizes that final nature, but the final nature of things itself, their suchness, their reality, their final nature, their emptiness of intrinsic existence. And so one way that one author said, reality itself, emptiness just as it is. And the idea here is that why do they use gold? Well, gold, this simile, part of that is that gold, gold, no matter how much it sits in dirt or filth or whatever, it doesn't stop being gold. It's never stained. It's never gold. The filth doesn't penetrate into the gold. It can stain the outside of it, but it can be washed off, and the gold is unchanged. And just so the final nature of things is unchanging. As I mentioned when Lisa asked her question, it's emptiness is permanent. that sense. It's a permanent phenomenon. It's not a changing phenomenon. Um, so the gold is like that. It's the final nature of things. And again, the idea here that you would contemplate is your mind is like that. So you would actually think. And even and the filth is like is a simile for, as I mentioned this last time, for when our mental afflictions are very active. So when we have like a flare up of our mental afflictions. And the idea is you would actually sit and meditate and think, wow, even while I was caught up in whatever my mental affliction was, there was the unchanging gold right there that wasn't changed by it. It was not stained, it wasn't harmed, it was always there, present in the filth of my mental afflictions, the filth of my pride, and the filth of my whatever it was. And also I said this a few times now in other classes, but I want to say it again, is that and part of this is that we tend to identify with the mental afflictions that we have, right? So people say, "Oh, I'm this kind of person. I'm an angry person, or I'm a whatever." And sometimes we put ourselves down, right? We like criticize ourselves a lot, and so on. And actually, that's an expression of over-identifying with our mental affliction. And what this is suggesting is the filth is just filth. Like it's not anything. It's not permanent. It just arose due to conditions. We'll have to poop, whatever is the deal. Wash it off and identify with the gold because that's what's permanent about it. That's that what's permanent about you, what's unchanging about you is your Buddha nature. And all the other stuff that comes up, um, everybody has it, right? All sentient beings have mental afflictions. Causes and conditions can cause any mental affliction to arise. And they don't really have anything to do with your deepest nature. They call it adventitious, right? It means they're just temporary things that arose due to causes and conditions that can be eliminated. But nothing can eliminate your deepest nature. Nothing ever has, nothing ever will. And eventually, when you're a Buddha, you'll be in a state of always seeing that deepest nature directly. And you won't have those mental afflictions anymore, actually. Because those mental afflictions, I'll make one more point, actually. There's a beautiful teaching by the first Panchen Lama, Losing Chogi Gelsen, which is he has a debate between ignorance and wisdom. What's the word? He anthropomorphizes them, and he has them argue with each other. And at some point, I'm going to paraphrasing, obviously, but wisdom tries to, I mean, I'm sorry, first, ignorance tries to sort of give wisdom a hard time. So ignorance says, look, and it applies to now quite well, right? Ignorance says, look around the world. Nobody's interested in you, wisdom. People are caught up in all kinds of insanity. Uh, how could you be important? And then wisdom says to ignorance, uh, kind of, he doesn't put it this way, but he doesn't use this phrasing, but basically he says, well, that's strange that you would say that because actually, you know, you're based on something that's not even real. Whereas ignorance is grasping at something that doesn't exist. And he says, so I'm not relevant. Uh, I'm grounded in reality. I'm seeing things as they are. He says, you're just elaborating on something that never existed in the first place. And he says, so actually, you're quite weak because you're made up. You're based on an illusion. Uh, and he said, and so wisdom says, I'm realizing the nature of things which was there from the very beginning, uh, and will always be there, and is always accessible. You know, you just make stuff up basically, and that's very weak because it's based on something that's not even real. So you'll be overcome, and when beings see reality, they can permanently eliminate ignorance, but nothing can eliminate reality because reality is as it is. And so it's like that. That makes sense. So the idea here is you want to identify with what's real, and more identify with what's real, and then see what's real. The ultimate nature of yourself, and then all the mental afflictions fall away anyway, because they're not grounded in anything real. They're just an illusion. They're based on illusion.
is, you know, karma.
Yep.
Every time I blow it, I think, actually, I don't want a couple more eons before I'm gonna get there, you know, I mean. I think about, you know, you're there.
They do.
That's 12.
But you said they fall away, I guess when they ripen.
Well, actually, they fall. Well, one point that in Buddhism they make is that you know, negative karma can be purified. First of all, right? And the best way, they actually say this in the teachings, the most powerful way to realize to purify negative karma is actually to realize emptiness or to meditate on emptiness. And if you meditate on, like actually one way of doing it, one way of meditating on that is like if you, let's say you, so whenever you create a negative karma, right? It's based on some mental affliction which arose out of ignorance, right? So ignorance is actually the root cause of creating that. You know, so like let's say, for example, if somebody grasps that an intrinsic exists in I and an intrinsic exists in other, and then they get angry at that other and they act out towards that other. Right? That's a negative karma, and it could lead to a negative result, right? Or it will lead to a negative result unless it's purified. And one way of purifying the negative karma is to meditate on how the intrinsically existent I and the intrinsically existent other I was grasping at when I got angry didn't exist in the first place. I grasped it at not illusory, but sorry to say it. I was grasping it at a self that doesn't exist. There is a self that exists, but not that one. That makes sense. And there is an other that exists, but it's not the one I was grasping at. I was projecting something that doesn't exist onto that. Others do exist, obviously. I'm not saying they don't. It self-exists. But when you get angry at somebody, actually you're projecting something onto that person that's not there at all. And if you meditate on that, that's one way of purifying your negative karma. So that's why, if going back to the pension lama's point, you know, he's saying, so yes, negative karma exists, but but because it arose out of ignorance, it can be purified. That's one way of putting it.
So when we're informed by academics or playwrights or people who author books that human beings are naturally storytellers, I'm thinking about that in context of what you just said. Because it's the story, you know, with the ignorance, it's about making up a story. Sometimes being very creative about, you know, what's going on, what you're projecting out, but still, so storytelling is very valued in the conventional world. So it's a daunting task to stop doing it because it's so highly valued.
Well, one point I'll make, I agree
Yeah.
with what you're saying, and I'll make a couple quick points. One is we have to be careful what stories we're telling. Is you know, at one
Right.
point, right? Because there are stories that inspire love, and there are stories that inspire hate, for example. You know, that's one point. And then this is not. This is not. I'm not explaining emptiness right now when I say it, but part of what we're implying here is recognizing. I'm going back to the one taste part.
Mhm.
That a story that inspires love, and a story that inspires hate, and a story that inspires pride, and a story that inspires humility are all stories. And that's part of what we're trying to understand also, if that makes sense. So like there's two different points. One is tell the right story, tell better stories if we're going to tell stories. But a different point is also recognizing, and even the best story is still a story.
Right.
And it's not the final nature of things. There is no story that's the final nature of things, right? Because the final nature of things is beyond stories, beyond words.
It's just what it's such as it is.
Yeah, that's okay, and then the last five similes are connected to the lineage. I was calling it right, Lurik Tibet lineage. There's the translation here. So let's, oh, so the fifth one it should be. So it says like a treasure, a fruit, a fruit tree. The lineage is known to be twofold. Okay, let's start with that. Um, so in terms of lineage, right, or Buddha nature, now they're making a point. They say the treasure, right? So this one is the simile is that it's a treasure buried under the ground. The idea is that like if it were a poor person who was living in a kind of small house and was suffering from poverty, and they didn't know that right underneath the floor of their house was an amazing treasure, right? Incredibly valuable treasure. So somebody just pointed out to them, hey, right under your floor is a treasure. Dig it up and you'll be fine. That we're like that, right? We're living in the poverty of samsara, but hidden under our floorboards is our Buddha nature. So here, what that's getting at is there are two, in the teaching it says there are two types of Buddha nature. The way using the terms is the naturally abiding Buddha nature and the developing Buddha nature. So this is the naturally abiding Buddha nature. And the naturally abiding Buddha nature is the ultimate nature of your own mind, right? It's emptiness of intrinsic existence. And so that's like a treasure hidden within. And what they say here is that part of the reason they use that metaphor of a treasure, like it's like, for example, if you had like naturally occurring diamonds or something under your floorboards, there's no need for effort. They're there already. Like it's like naturally occurring, a naturally occurring treasure. So part of the metaphor there is that you don't have to do anything to have that treasure be there. It's naturally there. And just so your naturally abiding Buddha nature is naturally in the nature of mind. You don't have to do anything to produce it. It was even if you tried to not do something to produce it, it would still be there, and so on. It is the nature, and it's indestructible. So that's the naturally abiding Buddha nature. Whereas then the next one, the simile was of a seed, like the seed of a fruit tree that will grow into a tree. That's the developing Buddha nature. So you get the simile here, right? Tree has to grow. It's not like a treasure. It's not like some naturally occurring piece of gold or diamond or something. It's a tree that has to grow up. And that's our developing Buddha nature. And so the developing Buddha nature uh, is the point here is that we all have uh, some good qualities. We all at certain moments have some capacity for empathy or some capacity for compassion or even just the wish to be free from suffering. Um, and um, and that and part of the point is so that those uh, good qualities that we already have can increase. And there's a beautiful teaching in the teachings on Buddhist, it's called like epistemology, we should call it, like by Dharmakirti, where he says, you know, you have a certain kind of physical strength. You know, anybody has whatever level of physical strength they have, and that can be increased to a certain extent if you go to the gym, I guess, or whatever, if you work out. But there's a limit, right? Like, and there is, you know, like you know, you could increase how much you can lift or how far you can run or something, but there's a limit. There will come a point where you can't, because of the nature of our bodies, we can't lift, you know, more than a certain amount. Um, you can't jump higher than a certain, you know, the whatever, maybe when they're doing the Olympics now, maybe somebody will break a record, but the record will be broken by what, like a tiny bit. They're not going to double the record, right? It's not possible. Human beings can't do certain things because of the nature of our bodies, you know, and even in like a cheetah is faster than human, but there's only so fast a cheetah can run also. Um, so human, I mean, but the point is like, or not just human, but our physical capacities can increase, but only to a certain extent. But then Dharmakirti makes this point. He says, but when a mental good quality doesn't have a limit, and so like love can become infinite. You can love an infinite number of beings infinitely. you can compassion can become infinite. You can have compassion for an infinite amount of compassion for an infinite number of beings. Because the nature of the mind, this is what we're getting at Buddha nature, because the nature of the mind is such that there's nothing intrinsically limiting to those good qualities. So if you can have like one tiny moment of compassion for, like, say, an animal that got injured, it just comes up naturally. Like you see something happen, you go, right? That's like this tiny moment of compassion. But that can be increased infinitely because it's the nature of the mind. There's nothing intrinsically limiting. And I'm going to go off on a slight tangent here. I sometimes, because I work as a psychologist, I've sometimes reflected on it. I've reflected on this point many, many times. And I'll say that it's true, actually. Like there is, and part of what I'll point out is like, you know, if you live, if you live for a while among bodhisattvas, then you get to see that in the positive sense, right? Like great beings. But if you don't, you can, if you want to develop faith in this, like if you check your own experience of people you've known, right? If somebody has like a little bit of anger and then they start, and then they ruminate on anger, and they start like, if they like, so say somebody gets mad about something, and then they start thinking about it and thinking about it, and they keep thinking about what they're angry about, and actually it happens, right? People don't sleep. They stay up all night thinking because they can't sleep, right? They're thinking about what they're angry about. And then if they go on and on, right? People can become like a little bit of anger, if you let yourself, can become rage, right? And then you can, like, your whole body, people turn bright red, right? And then they can't control themselves. They act out, they throw things, they smash things, they'll even kill people, right? They can become mass murderers or something. So a tiny bit of anger can become infinite, right? Where that person subjectively, like, and I, sometimes you so like, I'd like to destroy the whole world. They're so angry, right? And the same thing with worry, right? You can have we all have a little bit of worry, but actually, if you sat around and thought about what you're worried about, you like, actually, I sometimes joke like this. If you wanted to, right, you could, like, get yourself breathing difficult, and then like think about one thing, and then say, okay, think about everything that can go wrong, and just like keep thinking of that all night and all day, and keep doing that. Don't do this, by the way, obviously, right? A terrible idea. But you could have a panic attack, right, where you would feel the entire world is crushing you, and you're like, it's normal human experience. It happens every day to people, right? And depression, right? We all get down. But if you actually, psychology has shown through research, if you have a physical predisposition, but then what people have to have some predisposition to depression usually, but if you ruminate, that's actually when they've done studies about people who have had depression, and then how do you prevent it? As a psychologist, part of my job is help people not have another episode of depression. And so they've done a lot of scientific studies, and what they find is rumination is a key point. So there is, if a person has had depression before, and then they start ruminating, thinking, oh, this is bad, and that's bad, and I'm bad, at a certain point that will affect their biology, then they'll ruminate more, and then it becomes a vicious cycle, and get caught so my point is, any emotional experience can become limitless, like anything you feel, actually. And so I sometimes say, so imagine having a compassion attack instead of a panic attack, or imagine having like a rage of love, right, where like it's unstoppable, and you feel totally overwhelmed with love for all beings, and like everyone you see, you're like exploding with love. Like, you may have met people who are like that with anger, right? Where the slightest thing will get them shouting. But imagine if like the slightest thing made you feel incredible love. And what Buddhism is saying, that's possible. It's possible with any emotion. If you do it with anger, you're going to be miserable. If you do it with love, you're going to be happy. If you do it with whatever, jealousy, you're going to feel miserable. Again, if you're going to do it with compassion, you'll be quite beautiful to yourself and others. And so that's developing Buddha nature, is that you have this capacity for limitless increase of your positive states. And so, and by the way, going back for a second, like I said, the teachings on previously with the Dharmakaya, right? There was the honey, which was a symbol of the teachings on the final nature, and the kernels, the grains, right, were the symbols of the teachings on the conventional. So this is the point of the teachings on the conventional. It's like all these, like I was saying, like there's, whatever, there's all these different kinds of grains. It's like you could say, how do you develop your love? How do you develop your compassion? how do you develop joy, how do you develop equanimity, how do you develop um, skillful means that's playfully knows how to help people, right? And those are teachings in Buddhism. It's like, how do you take your capacity now to be creative in a good way and make it limitless so that you create whole universes, right? You create, they call them Buddha fields, right? You create whole universes where beings can become enlightened. Like now you can maybe create like some little work of art. Good. Okay. Now, like, you increase that till you can make whole planets that are like works of art to enlighten beings. That's what a Buddha is, actually. A Buddha is a being who goes around creating like cultures and creating places and creating whatever they need to create, like anything to help others. And so you increase that, right? The same with your love. And there are actual meditations where you just sit there and you meditate on love, or you walk around and meditate on love. And you keep doing it and it becomes more and more, right? And it's not that hard actually, right? Like, in a short amount of time, you can have a rage of love. In a short amount of time, it's like that's possible. So that's the developing Buddha nature, is that you have these little bits of good qualities or medium amounts, whatever, and then you increase them. And you do the meditations to do that. And I want to point out, so the result of your um, of the treasure like naturally abiding Buddha nature will be your dharma, your mind as a Buddha. And then the result of your developing Buddha nature, which you already have, but right, will be what they call the form bodies of Buddha. And one of those is called the enjoyment body. That's like a body made of light that's blissful and a pure land that is sort of teaching bodhisattvas. And then, like, what they say actually, that you have that kind of body as a Buddha, but then you feel, well, yeah, that's good for bodhisattvas, but like, I want to also help the worst people. I want to help people who aren't bodhisattvas. I want to help confused beings. And so then you manifest other kinds of bodies that go out, and they say Buddhas manifest all different kinds of bodies to go out and help. Some are like Buddha Shakyamuni who become a teacher, but they manifest as artists, or they manifest as like build bridges or do whatever, like build schools or do whatever is needed to help beings. So those are like other kinds of form bodies that Buddhas manifest. And so anyway, the idea is that these kinds of Buddha nature you already have, by increasing those qualities, you become this kind of being that can, on the one hand, your mind is always seeing reality as it is, but then you have bodies and voices that go out and talk to people and do things for people and explain things for people to help them. Does that make sense? Like that's what these symbolize now. So again, if you're going back to the metaphors, right, you think of the tree and you think, I want to nurture that tree. Like I want to water it, I want to give it sunlight, I want to protect it. And sometimes if it's a little sapling, you want to like put something around it, like what do we call those strings, like to help make sure it doesn't fall over. So whatever good qualities you have, you protect them for now, right? You increase them. You think, how do I do that? And your main two tasks are those. Like one is, how do I nurture my current good qualities, increase them? And then how do I explore and sort of get closer to realizing deepest nature? And if you can do those two things, that's the way you become a Buddha. You realize your deepest nature, which is the emptiness, final nature of things, and then you develop your positive qualities, the generosity, and that's the six perfections also: generosity, ethics, patience, and so on. And that's what bodhisattvas do. Actually, they say that Shantideva says in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. Like bodhisattvas have to seek out difficult people to practice patience. So they go around going, "Oh, I got to find somebody difficult. I want to practice patience today." And they go, "Oh, good. Here's a difficult person." They like hang out with them, and then they go and some bodhisattvas have said like, "Oh, it becomes difficult because if you practice patience very effectively, then sometimes the person becomes nicer. And you have to go find somebody else to practice with." There's a famous story of Atisha, the great Indian master who came to Tibet, and he had like a really annoying attendant from India he'd brought with him. And the attendant traveled with him all over Tibet. And then at a certain point, the attendant said, "I'm tired." He was complaining. He was a complaining kind of person. He was unhappy all the time. So he said, "I'm tired of Tibet. I don't like it. I want to go back to it." And Atisha said, "Now you can go back. It's okay." And then like a Tibetan person said, "Why'd you let him go? Why'd you say when he said he wanted to go back, like he was complaining a lot, how'd you decide to let him go back?" And Atisha said, "Well, I brought him with me because I needed somebody to practice patience, but now I found there are plenty of people in Tibet who can practice patience. So he can go home." Which I thought was, I think the Tibetan person must think, "Oh," like, But that's what bodhisattvas do, is they increase their positive qualities like that. And then let's see, so those are the first two. And the next one is read the text first. The next one is the beginningless naturally abide. Oh, let's see, the treasure and the fruit tree. Oh, that's we read those. Um, so after the tree should be, oh, the precious statue inside the worn out cloth. And that's the nature body, not newly created, but already there, precious and unchanging, not arisen from causes and conditions. So that's the idea, is that that's also, it's a symbol of the emptiness of your own mind. So it's a statue, so it's something kind of the idea is something kind of stable, I guess is the way you would put it. But the simile here is that it's the naturally abiding. It comes from that. I guess the way to put it is this: is that the naturally abiding Buddha nature that you already have, when you become a Buddha, will become your nature body. And what it's really getting at is this: actually, is that the way Khenpo Rinpoche put it once, who was my teacher about this topic, was that he said he was saying that the naturally abiding Buddha nature is the lack of intrinsic or inherent existence of your own mind. And the nature body is the lack of intrinsic nature or inherent existence of the mind of a Buddha. The Buddha you'll be someday. And also the Buddhas who exist now. And when we look at it from a conventional perspective, they're two different things, right? I'm an ordinary person, that's a Buddha. What Khenpo was pointing out is, he was saying, from the perspective of somebody who's realizing nature, the ultimate nature of their mind, it's undifferentiable. So in other words, it's not, because an emptiness is an emptiness. So they're the same taste, or they're the same nature. And so, from a conventional perspective, you say, well, I'm an ordinary person, that's a Buddha. Those are two different things, of course. But what this is getting at is that from the point of view of realization, the ultimate nature of your mind and the ultimate nature of the Buddha's mind are, that's an interesting word to put it, undifferentiable. And I find there's something quite peaceful to think of that. Like, just think, wow, yeah, go ahead.
So, wait, it's true. Could there be like enlightened people out there who don't even realize that they're enlightened?
It's an interesting question, isn't it? What Buddhism would say, it's an interesting point, and that actually these teachings on Buddha nature often bring up that question. So that's a good question. And what the teachings say is that on the one hand, if you're, say this right, on the one hand, if you're a Buddha, you know you're a Buddha. That's one point, because the Buddha knows things as they are, so they know their own nature. So from one perspective, you'd have to say, in terms of actual Buddhahood, Buddhas know they're Buddhas. But on the other hand, you could say actually that so in terms of fully enlightened, it's not, it was a fully enlightened being knows they're fully enlightened. On the other hand, one could say actually though that actually there are many examples, so you could say that true. It is true actually that where people don't realize that they're closer than they thought they were to enlightenment, or that they have, or we sometimes say people have awakened their Buddha nature more than they think they have, for example. That's often true, and it happens in the teachings. I mean, so there are examples of that. And I remember this just the other day. Actually, I was sharing a story with a friend. But there's a famous. It's just in my mind, so I'll share it. But there was a story where Milarepa, who's a great saint of Tibet, great light beings of Tibet, there was a point where he had low self-esteem. He had done some bad things in his life and felt bad about himself and felt terrible about himself at a certain point. And then he started studying. He was like, I want to become enlightened. So he was studying with his teacher. And his teacher had a group of students, and he told them all to go watch he said, each of you watch your dreams tonight. And your dream is going to have a portent for the future. So like all the other students had these dreams of things, I don't remember exactly, but like of like light rays and golden something radiating light. And they were like, they woke up and they were like, oh, I had this really cool dream. That was so cool. And they were all excited. And Milarepa had a dream of like some kind of like huge catastrophe that killed millions of people. And he woke up and he was I'm the worst. I'm terrible. And he was uh, like freaked out. He was like, I can't even go. They're all gathering. All the students are gathering my teacher. I can't go. I can't tell my dream. They're going to think I'm like this horrible person. But he was like, but he told me to come, so I can't not go. I can't not show up. And so he shows up, and the other teachers, the other students tell the teacher, I had this dream of the golden this or the light rays, or he says, oh, that's good, and it symbolizes that you should go do this practice, or oh, that's good, it symbolizes you should go teach in this place or something. There was a light shining in the east, and so that means you should probably go to this eastern town and start teaching there. You have some connection there or something. And then like Milarepa is like hiding in the back. So he's like, like I don't want to. And finally his teacher's like, all right, what's your dream? And he's like totally embarrassed. And he says, I had this dream of a horrible event where billions of people were killed. And I think I'm like, don't even belong here. And his teacher, Marpa, says, that's the best dream of all, by far. And he says, the deaths of all those people doesn't symbolize actual death. It symbolizes you're going to overcome, you're going to destroy the ignorance through your teachings of countless beings, and that your teachings will overcome, will sort of cause the death of their ignorance, but not of them. You're going to help countless beings. He says, you're my foremost disciple. And which was quite a beautiful story. But I'm getting at this point that, like, I think it gets to your question. Like Milarepa thought he was the worst of the students, but he was actually the best in that case. So we don't know that part, if that makes sense. So on the one hand, a Buddha would know Buddha, but sometimes for us ordinary people, as we're progressing, we sometimes don't know our capacities. Does that answer your questions? I was just thinking of that story that day, so I was telling you. But
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much. These are wonderful teachings. As we're thinking, reflecting on good nature, the idea of lack of intrinsic nature of the mind, the permanence of that. But when I think about gold or honey, I tend to think of something more solid and a little bit more autonomous. Was there any kind of risk for, reflecting on that when in fact it is lack of intrinsic nature
yeah, no, you're exactly right. And that's why all of any simile or any metaphor for, is ultimately flawed, is not, and there is no metaphor that can actually, or simile that can actually get at this. But the last section text says there are reasons to use them, of course, so they have a certain purpose, to help us, but they're not. Yeah, and you're right. And if we reify sort of the ultimate nature, then they actually get in the way. So we have to be careful not to do that. That they're to encourage us or to help us contemplate. But you're right. In the end, there is no simile for emptiness. There is no simile for enlightenment either, in a way. And they all fail in the end, but they're helping us get closer to sort of get. I think you're right. I'll do I guess there are just this actually. So then there are two more, I think. Oh yeah. So I was saying earlier, right, the naturally abiding Buddha nature leads to the nature body, right? Which is the mind of the Buddha, or the emptiness, rather. It's not the mind of it, it's the emptiness of the Buddha's mind. And the emptiness of our mind, there one taste I just left off there. And I said a few minutes ago, the developing Buddha nature, right? Our current good qualities, whatever they may be, we can increase them, and along the path, they can just become more, right? So like, in other words, a little bit of love becomes a little bit of compassion becomes great compassion. And I can say that, like, one thing I love about Buddhism is that, like, we don't even have words. That Buddhism has so many words for compassion, like different kinds of different versions. They're like lists sometimes of this many types of compassion, and that many types of compassion, this many types of love, and that many types of love and different levels of the path. It's like we don't think about that. We don't. We have. I sometimes think we need to have more words for these things, like to understand them more. To become more curious about them. But anyway, I don't want to go too far in tangent there. But I said earlier, so the developing Buddha nature leads to these two bodies, right? The two form bodies of Buddha. One, I said, is the complete enjoyment body, which I love that term, right? An enjoyment body, because it enjoys Mahayana, enjoys love, and enjoys compassion. Bob Thurman calls it the body of beatitude, which I think is a better translation. But I like. And then the other are the emanation bodies, which could be like the emanation body, like Shakyamuni Buddha, who forms a kind of new teaching system on a planet, or there are emanation bodies, like I said, that could be emanate as an artist, or as a musician, or as a builder, or as a scientist, or as a whatever. There are all different kinds of emanations that a Buddha manifest. But the idea here is that these last two similes represent those two types of bodies. So the eighth of the nine was a universal monarch, right? The story was like there was like a woman who's pregnant, who's alone and wandering, who's kind of uh, in poverty and kind of in a homeless shelter, and nobody knows, and she doesn't know that the child in her womb is eventually going to become a great, powerful monarch. And the simile there is that we are like the wandering and difficult in a difficult circumstance in samsara, but within us is this capacity to become something powerful and wonderful that can help beings. So the simile there, first of all, that's the general simile for that we have Buddha nature within us, if that makes sense. We're pregnant with Buddha nature. We can give birth to our future Buddhahood, is the idea. But the idea here is that if you're going to be specific and use this contemplation, then that universal monarch fetus, is a simile for the complete enjoyment body. And the reason why is that the complete enjoyment body, they say, is like a sovereign, sense. They live actually in a pure land, and they sort of abide in this pure land with bodhisattvas, and they are always kind of teaching the Mahayana. They're helping bodhisattvas to finish the path, and so in that sense, our current compassion and love and so on will give rise to a kind of someday to an experience like that of kind of being the kind of teacher or leader of a kind of pure land that helps advanced bodhisattvas to finish their path. So it's a simile for that kind of body result of our lineage. So our lineage will get, and by the way, lineage, going back to lineage, so like, because part of that is like, if you have like a certain, I was thinking of, like, I was just thought, oh, I'll just very briefly, like I was thinking of I have an uncle who was a lawyer. He's retired now. He was a lawyer, and then he has three sons, my cousins, who are lawyers. They became lawyers like him. I guess they thought he seemed happy and liked his career, so they became different kinds of lawyers, but they all went to law school. So there was a kind of lineage in that family. If that makes sense, right? In his family, like where his sons followed in his footsteps. I'm using the word lineage on purpose, right? Here, the idea is your lineage, our lineage, is in reference to the Buddha, right? So we're going to become a Buddha, like our Buddhas can be male or female, sorry, like our mother or father. We're going to become a Buddha. And in that sense, like we're going to follow in the Buddha's footsteps or something like that, and have our own pure land and the Buddha, and have our own place where we help others. So it'll be like that. And so the idea here is that you become a sovereign over the path of compassion, right? You become a kind of somebody who understands it completely and can help others understand it. And then the last one is the emanation body. And that's where the metaphor here is like a clay mold, like there's a giant piece of clay. And if you walk by it, you would just think, oh, that's some big piece of clay. But there's a sculptor. And the sculptor built a gorgeous statue. And it was in a mold, like it was poured the gold into the mold and turned it. So if you walk by, you would think, oh, that's some big piece of clay. What is that? But the sculptor knows all they have to do is tap it with a hammer and a chisel, and all the clay will fall off, and you'll see this golden, beautiful statue there. And the simile there is that, again, the clay is our mental afflictions that have to fall away, but they're not what's important. Again, remember that whole point, right? Like we identify with the clay, saying you're not your clay. That will fall away. What's left is the golden, beautiful statue within. And the metaphor here, or the simile rather, is that those are the emanation bodies, right? That and that when the and the part of the in the teaching, what it said was once the sculptor taps it and the clay falls away, everyone will be able to see the beautiful statue. It'll be on display. And just so when you manifest emanation bodies in the future because of your lineage, right, you're naturally or you're developing Buddha nature, then everyone will be able to see and benefit from those emanation bodies that will appear to help them. You'll manifest them and everybody can see them and interact with them, and that way beings will receive help that they need. So that's the simile there. And so again, I'll just conclude. You get the point here. All these are just for contemplation. They're just things that you don't need to memorize them or sort of. It's not that, but there are things that you can then come back to and contemplate. Go, oh wow, I have that nature. I can manifest that kind of these qualities for others. I have this ability to do that, and I'm not unique in that. Everybody has that. So you would contemplate like that. I know we have to stop to say, John, one quick, good one. John has his hand up, so I'll let go ahead.
I was really struck by the story of Milarepa and Marpa.
Yep.
And I wanted to ask you, so when Marpa heard Milarepa's recounting about his nightmare, and Marpa replied that, that was the best dream of all, did he say that because he was pointing out that it was a purification or what? I didn't quite catch why he said
No,
that.
no, I think what it was actually that Marpa knew, like, before Marpa met Milarepa, he had been prophesied to Marpa. Like, I think Naropa said, someday you'll have one disciple who will have a unique capacity to carry on your lineage. And the story goes that as soon as Marpa met Milarepa, he could see that's the person. But Milarepa was in a terrible state. He felt bad about himself. He had a hard time. He had a difficult life. He would, so all along, Marpa knew that Milarepa had a unique capacity to help others. And so he was nourishing him, but sometimes he nourished him by being difficult, as you know, if you've read the story. He was quite difficult. He wasn't an easy teacher. But this was late in the story. So Marpa knew very well who Milarepa was and what his capacity was. And so I think Marpa knew when he had the dream that it symbolized that he was getting closer to being able to realize that. This is later in the story, after Milarepa had received teachings and was practicing. So I think it was at that point, it may have been a purification, I'm not sure, but I think it was more that Marpa knew that was Milarepa's capacity, and that dream for him symbolized that he had a capacity to go out in the world and really connect with people, and that his lineage would spread far and wide. I think it was more that in that case.
I'm not I'm not quite clear on why a dream about the death of a lot of sentient beings would indicate that. But I mean, I can see on the one hand that maybe it's a purification, that he's clearing the path so that his Buddha nature can be revealed. But I've often heard, that people in retreat do have nightmares because, they're purifying things quickly. Like I think there's even a passage in the Dhammapada Sutra about that, right? But
That's true in general. I think this one though, it was more a symbol of that. I think if I remember right, I think the symbol that Marpa was saying was that it wasn't that Milarepa had experienced it as if in the dream as people dying, but that what Marpa said was that it actually symbolized that their ignorance would die. Not that that it was a symbol. It was a symbolic that, like sometimes we interpret dreams. You said my interpretation dream is that it wasn't about people dying, it was about their ignorance dying. I think that was
okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
I think that was
Thank you.
And anyway, so I'll just say quickly two things. One is so we have class next week. Next week, I think what I'm going to do. We may be able to finish next week. I'm thinking because it's just now there's just the last section, last bit. So maybe we might finish class next week. I'm not sure. On this topic, I'm going to give a brief summary of the other chapters as well. So if we don't, then we'll do one more class. I'm not 100% sure actually. And then there were a few questions. So people feel free to bring questions. And John, I'll look up your questions. You gave a couple. So next class, I'll finish the text, say a few things about the rest of the book that we're not going to cover because it's just chapter 1 for this curriculum. And then I'll take questions, and if we finish, good. If not, we'll do one more. And then after that, somebody had requested that we do like a class on White Tara, just that one time, not a whole class, but like a one-time session. So I'll schedule that, I think. And then anyway, then we'll go on. We'll do it, and then people can email Jan about other topics, if we want to continue with the basic program. And then for folks who are here, also, I guess Youngton Rinpoche is coming at 2 or 2:30 or something.
Well, he'll be here at 2:30, but people to regather at 2 p.m. if you're coming. He's